Hello and welcome to the Young Musician's Guide. Today we have flutist with the Navy Band in the Northwest, Clara Mannino. Clara and I went to graduate school together, and when I was thinking of having people on here, I really got interested in somebody who is in a military band, but not one of the premier bands. One of the more, I think, in my opinion, more optic and more attainable ensembles. Ones that I feel like more people would be going for, as opposed to the premier bands. And also somebody who, also went through the freelance game and did all those sorts of things. Plus somebody I personally know. So we have a really cool conversation. We talk about like her persistence and her drive since she was little of making this happen. She also goes into a lot of like the process that she went through with the military, things that she has liked about the military and like what that job has done for her, and also a good bit of bio about herself and all that sort of a thing. So really excited to have her on. Again, if you want to catch the reaction recording of these episodes, I go through a little bit of a blurb, like 5 or 10 minute blurb after the episode, but that is for patrons only. So if you're curious about that and want to check it out, please consider becoming a Patreon patron. Links for that are in the description or the show notes if you're ever listening to that, or just patreon.com/AKCYouth. It's in there. That supports both this podcast and my YouTube page. But with that, let's go ahead and dive into it. Let's go into our conversation with flutist Clara Mannino. This is the first time that we have spoken in 5 years, 6 years? No.
Yes, 5 years now. Yeah.
Were we the same year? You came in at the same time I did. We had to go through research methods together.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah, that was a great class. Yes, I think you graduated a year prior to me, and then I did. So half of my degree we were together. So yeah.
Okay.
Great time.
So you must have just hated Virginia then, because you just ran right back to the other side of the country.
No, I really enjoyed my time in Virginia. Being from Washington, we have not that many different kinds of trees. It's like they mostly look like pine trees or Christmas trees, and then I went over to Virginia and I'm like, it's like Hobbiton. There's all these round trees and like the hills and everything. And of course they called their hills mountains, but they didn't look like mountains to me. But so it was.
I think scientifically they are not hills, or right. Scientifically they're not mountains. Like they're like 2 feet short from being like classified.
Yeah.
Or something ridiculous like that.
Yeah, and of course
the pretentious guidelines of mountains.
Yes. Well, it worked for me. But no, it was a wonderful neighborhood and everything. But when I graduated my master's, I was offered a position at Spokane Falls Community College teaching adjunct flute lessons. So I thought, well, it doesn't make sense to stay here when the job's over there.
Yep.
So I went and did 3 years at the community college teaching flute lessons.
And did you just do flute, or did they have you teach anything else while you were there?
Occasionally I would sub for the music theory class, and that was a good time. Really good kids. So it was grand.
Did you take that teaching music theory course?
Yes, I did.
Were we in that together?
I think so.
Oh man. It's so, oh my goodness, it feels like so long ago.
Dude, it was a while ago, yeah.
Oh, it was. Oh man. So you were also freelancing at the time, right?
I was, yeah. Gals gotta hustle. You're making a living as a musician. So that happened, yeah. I was.
Were you teaching? Okay.
Yeah, I was teaching private flute lessons. I was singing at 3 or 4 local Catholic churches. I was music directing for one of those churches. And then I noticed that there were a lot of adult ensembles going on. There was mostly bands, adult community bands. And I thought, I know of a lot of, whenever I'm talking with people and I tell them I'm playing the flute, and they're like, oh yeah, I used to play the flute a long time ago. These adults that are approaching retirement. They're like, yeah, I really wish I could pick it up again, but it's been so long. So I started teaching those adults, and then I thought, golly, there's so many of these, and they're not quite at the level to join a community band yet, but they would love to they would benefit from playing in an ensemble and learning those ensemble skills. So I decided to start a flute choir in Spokane, and I did it through Holy Names Music Center first, And then we moved on to be our own thing. And I'm proud to say that that flute choir is still in operation. And I was able to pass it on to my friend Heather Johnson, and she's still making music for adult flute players.
And that's the Spokane Flute Choir, right?
Yeah, that's the Spokane Flute Choir.
So it was aimed at kind of that lost generation of flute players who have kind of
at first that needed a small ensemble environment to learn ensemble skills, and then so that they could integrate into all these great opportunities that were in Spokane. So that's how we started, but we've grown, and now we're attracting a whole range of ability levels. And so it's really exciting. That's probably the thing I'm most proud of.
Really? That's so cool. And I think about it a lot. Like I'm from South Florida, right?
Yeah.
And that the joke there is that's where America goes to die. And I can't tell you. So I was in a big band playing trombone, and like we would get these old people, like they would come up to you to like shake your hand, God bless them. And then and they would just be like, my dad used to play kazoo in the Sousa band. They were so sweet. And so many times you'd be like, they'd be like, oh, I played clarinet. And I'd be like, oh, are you still, do you play at all or anything? They're like, no, I dropped it. And the answer after that, it's always like, no, I don't, but I wish I still did. No one ever doesn't say, I'm so glad I put down the trumpet.
Good thing good riddance. Yeah.
And so it's so cool that you did something about that in the community that you were in. Now, how was leading church music? Because that seems like a very busy, to somebody just attending a church service. It's like, oh, they're just there on Sundays and they're just, doing their thing. But that we know that's not it, right?
No. Music directing was, pretty intensive. For the Catholic liturgy specifically, there's a lot of rules about what kind of music is appropriate and inappropriate. So it's kind of helpful to have that knowledge when you're going into the music directing career, at least in the Catholic Church. And that's something that I had studied already. I was involved in youth ministry in my undergrad, so I knew kind of what was allowed and what wasn't allowed. So that was a lot of it. And so the music director is in charge of picking the music, sometimes with input from the priest or no, depending on the parish, and then leading the rehearsals and making sure every mass is covered, that there are musicians at every liturgy, because we have multiples a weekend. I was singing for one parish where we would do 4 masses a weekend. So that was pretty exhausting. Weekends were not the weekend. Actually, I had no weekends. When I was freelancing, there were no weekends.
That's true.
There were no weekends. But so it's both like knowledge of the repertoire, skills as a musician, and then probably the biggest, most important category is the interpersonal skills of being able to make people feel comfortable and at home, and like they're contributing something valuable in your choirs, if they're volunteer choirs, and then making sure that your professional musicians, if you have professional musicians, are feeling taken care of and respected. And then there's the relationships between your priest and the other members of the staff. So I think the most integral part of my success as a music director had to do with those interpersonal skills more than it did the music skills. And although, nobody wanted to hire you if you didn't have those, of course, but those are the interpersonal skills is what made me successful, having already, being pretty good at the music stuff.
But that was still part-time though, but I know there are churches that will have like a full staffed music, like an MD for this stuff. But I'm really curious, because you mentioned that you said that because you went to Central Washington? Did I get that right?
I did.
Okay, yes. And that was Flute Performance.
Yes.
But you mentioned that you did a little bit of religious music stuff while you were there?
Yeah, so I was a peer minister through their Newman Center, which I suppose was like the Catholic club, on campus or whatever. And I was given a position of being in charge of the liturgical organization, making sure that there was a mass on campus every week. So then I was studying the rules of the liturgy to make it official, on an on-campus place that wasn't in a church, so there are rules about celebrating the mass that I learned that way.
Really cool. Mm-hmm. So let's take it back a little bit more. So what made you decide, okay, flute performance is the way I want to go?
Mm-hmm. Well, I can't remember a time when I didn't have an attraction to the flute. I don't recall the first time that I heard it or saw it or knew anybody that played it. It was always, those first early memories were like, oh yeah, finally I get to meet a flute player. Or, oh, finally I get to hear what the flute sounds like. But it wasn't, oh, that's what the flute sounds like. I've always known I like that, Those were the feelings I had. So I had wanted to have lessons when I was really little, and my family, who gives flute lessons to a 4-year-old or whatever. So they bought me a little end blown, actually I have it here, a little end blown recorder flute.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, it's more what somebody at our church was of Native American descent. And so they made this little end blown flute,
cool.
which, yeah, let's see. So we have, when I was 4, we have pictures of me playing that. And when I got it, I was like, oh, good, this will hold me over until I can have a silver flute, So that happened. And, the dream kind of was inside of me for years and years after that. And then my family, we always went to the free Labor Day concerts that the Spokane Symphony puts on that are outside, and there's like a little fair next to it. And I think Hoffman's Music or the Spokane Youth Symphony had opened an instrument petting zoo, where they had flutes and violins and stuff for people to try. And I was 11 at the time. And they had that flute, and man, I circled that table like 6 times trying to get up the courage to say, hey, can I try that flute, please? And so I did, and she gave me the head joint, like you do. And she's like, wow, you got a sound right away. People don't usually do that. And I was like, huh, but that didn't bother me. I would have, put that in my face for 30 minutes if she'd let me until I got the first sound. It was just so interesting to me. But when I did get the sound, I was like, wow, I've got to remember that feeling, so that when I get my flute, I can practice. I can, not have to start all over again. I thought to myself. So months later, I would put my fingers on my chin and blow across my fingers, to like remember how it felt.
This is a lesson in persistence.
Yeah.
Of a young individual to get this thing to happen. So, yeah. So when did you finally get a flute in hand?
Right. So I, from that day when I tried the flute for the first time, I was asking my parents, can I please have a flute? Can I please have lessons? And that was in September. My birthday's in March. So in March, my family managed to borrow a flute from my cousin in California, Nadina. And that was her, student band flute that she's older than me. So she was able to send it without, needing it at that time. So I borrowed my cousin's flute, and that was a moment, when I opened that flute, I'm like, it's finally here, and then I was able to get lessons because my local music school, Holy Names Music Center, offered scholarships because we couldn't have afforded them anyway. So I got to have flute lessons with the principal flutist of the Spokane Symphony, Bruce Bott. And from the very beginning of my studies, thanks to the generosity of my community. So I got lessons right away, and man, I'd have those 30-minute, my teacher said, you need to practice 30 minutes a day. So I'm like, okay, set the timer for 30 minutes. I practiced 30 minutes, and then the 30 minutes would go by, and I'm like, oh, darn, I have to wait until tomorrow to do the next 30 minutes.
You are cut off.
Yeah, I was like, oh, and then the rest of the day I'd be like, can it be tomorrow yet? So I could practice. But yeah, obviously I was kind of, black and white thinking back then, but anyhow. So long story short, 3 years later, we're still having lessons, and my teacher says, you don't have to, you have to at least once try doing a competition, and it's not, you don't have to like it, but you're going to do it anyhow. Like, I'm forcing you to do this, and you can do it just one time, and then we'll have done with it, but you need to do it once. And I was like, sure, I'll do a competition. Like, I was excited about it, and we did it. And because I was homeschooled, I'd never heard anybody else my age play. So when I got there and I was listening to everybody else, I'm like, they sound really different than I do. And then they announced my name as the winner, and I was like, oh. And I had no idea that I had any aptitude for the instrument.
I like
I was
competitions all of a sudden.
yeah, I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. I just showed up and I did my thing, and I got really nervous, but I just kind of laughed my way through it because I'd never had nerves before. Or I didn't know where I stood. That wasn't really, I'd never thought of that before. And so I won the competition, and I get home and my dad says, so you got pretty good at playing the flute. You think you want to try something else? And I'm like, well, actually, Dad, I was kind of thinking of doing it as a career.
That's always an awkward conversation, isn't it?
Yeah, well, he said, oh, I mean, my dad is really supportive, and he thinks of things over time. So it took him a little while to turn around and think, yeah, I guess that's okay. And now he's all for it and cries at all my performances and everything, and it's awesome. But yeah. So then we got serious, and by my 4th year into playing an instrument, I knew that's what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And we started gunning for auditions at universities, and I ended up going to Central Washington and had a wonderful experience with Dr. Hal Ott, who really, helps me not only develop my flute playing skills, but the resilience skills and the performance anxiety skills, and managing all those little emotional and mental games that take somebody who has finger skills into being able to survive in the musical world, which is totally different things. You can have monkey skills, but if you don't have ways for managing the stress, then it won't work out. So he gave me those skills, and then I went to James Madison University and got lots and lots of practice time and experiences doing professional performances. And then I got out, freelanced for 3 years, and thought, I'm working my tail off, but I'm not playing my flute as much as I want to. So I guess I've got to find a job that pays me to play the flute primarily, rather than all the other stuff I was doing. So teaching and directing and all that. So I took, I think, 12 auditions. This was my 12th. And and I got it. And I just kind of came into it with this mindset of taking auditions is my part-time job. And I'm just going to keep taking auditions. This is just another day at the office until I get a yes. And that's just going to be my life for a while. So I accepted that. So when it only took like from, I started taking auditions in November. I won the audition in September of the next year. I thought I was going to be taking auditions for 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, and I wanted to mention, because you said 12, and to some people that's going to sound like a lot, but that's actually not that many. It's not that long of a ride on the bus, in all honesty. That's congratulations.
Yeah, thanks.
They're like you mentioned, years and years and years for something.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Because taking auditions is a skill, and it's not something that the simulated environment isn't duplicated in your undergraduate experience a lot of the time. Having to prepare 3 months for 30 seconds of, sometimes less, and just one excerpt coming in cold from a room, and then all the buildup before, being jet lagged, coming into a room with literally 75 other flutists, in one space, all warming up at the same time, and trying to keep your peace of mind in that environment, and then going through the rounds and having the waiting period in the rounds. And when I did the Navy band audition, for the DC band, we were there, like 6 hours, 8 hours or more. They get you there real early in the morning, and you just wait, and you sit there for all the rounds. And like that kind of mental energy to conserve, and then be ready to play the best excerpt of your life in that moment. There's just, you have to have done it more than once.
Yeah, it's like you mentioned, it's an 8-hour day.
Yeah.
To probably perform, liberally saying, probably 5 to 6 minutes if you make it through every round. Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes that 5 or 6 minute round will take 5 or 6 minutes, but you might have played 2 minutes worth of stuff in that round because of the pacing in between. Yeah.
So you mentioned that you were homeschooled. Were you in school ensembles? Like, were you in band or orchestra or anything like that?
No.
Did you play in like community groups or anything? Or was the first time that you stepped foot in like an orchestra or a band in college?
Almost. Almost. It was close. Yeah, that was a learning curve. So after I won that competition, I was open to lots of opportunities. Somebody hired me to play for one of the churches. So I started my first gig playing for just one mass a weekend, which later was, not that much, but anyhow, so I started doing that. And then I was invited to an honors chamber music ensemble from Holy Names Music Center that was free. Like if you got invited, then you didn't have to go. You didn't have to pay. And then, so I did that for a year, and man, all those little squares with the little numbers in them, measures of rest. I was like, what are people doing? So for the first year, I was kind of guessing, I didn't realize that you just like count the measures. So I was 15 at the time and not knowing how to count empty measures. And then a year later, I auditioned to join the youth symphony under Vern Wyndham and Spokane Youth Symphony. And it was great. But then there was this guy waving his arms. So I had mastered, like doing the counting the measures by myself. But then I'm like, how in the world does this relate? So I was playing second flute, and the principal flutist, of course, was playing the first part, but I was just kind of hoping we were doing the same thing. So I would just come in when he was coming in for that first rehearsal. I'm like, this is not working. So it was so embarrassing. But after that first rehearsal, I'm like, okay, we're playing, the Carmen Suite or whatever it was. And so I just found that on YouTube, and I found a video that had a guy waving his arms. And I practiced my part watching the guy wave his arms. And then the next rehearsal I had it, and it was okay. But yeah, it was.
That's such an opposite learning curve for people who are going to take auditions. Like you start taking auditions, and like one of the hard things for a lot of people is maintaining time without a metronome or a conductor. But you're set there. Like that was like your life for
that was my life. Yeah. I loved my metronome. I had been working with the metronome like crazy before. And yeah, with my, before I started doing ensembles, and then I did ensembles and learned all the games on top.
So do you feel like for lack of a better phrase of it, the stress management that you learned in your undergrad that you had mentioned, did that play into when you were trying to get out of the freelance game and you were taking your auditions?
Yes. Those, there's no way that I would have, because I think the biggest thing that I learned in my undergrad was, it's so important to me. It's hard to like boil it down, but I'll do my best. I think that the most important I learned, one is you can't put your worth in how well you play. That's one thing, because it's just too high stakes. If you have to prove that you're a worthwhile human being every time you pick up your instrument, then you're never going to be able to play successfully. That's too high pressure. You've hit the pressure. So I had to learn not to ultimize my performance that 1 minute and make that, because I had been making that one time that I play the entire measure of who I was as a person. And that's way too much pressure, and I still meet younger musicians who are finding their way, who feel that way. And it's not, it doesn't work. So what I learned instead is to just be easier on myself when I was perceiving my performances, and just being like, this is 1 minute. This is how I sound right now. And I adopted this mantra whenever I would perform and I started feeling that temptation to like put pressure on myself. I would use this mantra. It's not my best, not my worst, not my first, not my last. And that's my favorite, because it's like, not my first, I've been here before. I know how to handle this, and then not my last. There's more to come after this. This isn't the end of the world. Not my best, because that's just too much pressure. And it's not my worst, because let's be honest, when it hasn't counted and you've been dinking around in your practice room, you've certainly done worse, so, and that's really helped.
It's really teaching at the college and teaching a lot of young people, it's really hard to like separate, you hear the director say, hey, your A flat's a little sharp. And you don't hear the corrective,
and
like,
you don't
oh,
hear
it's just wrong. You hear, you're a bad person.
Right. You
Like,
hear, you suck.
Yeah.
You suck. And that's not the thing. I mean, I read the book when I was in my undergrad, Carol Dweck's Mindset of Success. And that, the whole book is based on these reviewing of these educational studies, where they took children and they said, okay, math is either something that you have or you don't. So just, take this test and we'll see if you have it or not. And then they told the other group, these are hard questions, but you're scored based on how much time you engage working at the difficult problem and, like learning by the end of the test, better than you did at the beginning of the test. And the people who are like, either you have it or you don't, they scored much lower than the people that were saying, you can just, it's based on how much time you engage with the problem, and that's really what also enabled me to be free to, when I heard your A sharp is flat or whatever you said, like to say, okay, I can work on that, like that's something that I can change and influence better. And that being the case does not mean that I'm a bad musician and not capable of doing this job or doing anything. It doesn't mean that I have failed. Mm-hmm. It means that I need to work on playing that in tune. and I can work on that.
And that works in the professional world in general, even outside of music. Like a lot of people hear any sort of, corrective anything from a boss or a higher up or anything like that, and they automatically assume they're like, oh, they're trying to undermine me, or I'm terrible at my job or whatever. And like, it's hard to sometimes like, no, this is just professional advice or critique or whatever, and move forward. So so was the decision to jump out of the freelance game and mostly just based on not playing the instrument as much? Because I know a lot of people tend to jump out of it too because of the like work versus reward kind of structure of that. So what were some of the factors that made you start to take the auditions?
Yeah. Well, I noticed, I was in my area doing really well for freelancing. When I would share my experiences with other freelancers, they're like, yeah, you're really getting it. And I was covering my expenses. I was living comfortably. It wasn't the Ritz-Carlton or whatever, but I had it. I wasn't worried about covering the rent during that time. So, but yeah, it was just a lot of work per check, because I would get, of course, lots of little checks, and then they would all combine together. And if I missed that one little check or this one little check, it added up, and suddenly I didn't. So if I wasn't running my hamster wheel all the time, then those gigs weren't generating, so that, and I thought to myself, well, this is really fun. This is really fun because I'm 25 or 26 or however old I was, and I have energy for this. I said, but if I ever, found someone I wanted to marry and like have a family or have friends or, like, or actually take a day off and not worry if it was going to mean no groceries next week, then I probably need to find something more stable. So yes. And I was like, I'm not happy when I'm not playing my instrument. It does a lot of wonderful things for my, emotional health. And so when and of course, if my livelihood depends on waving my arms or managing liturgical emails and all those sorts of things, then, it's not gonna happen, because for myself, I'm not the kind of person that prioritizes easily the things I enjoy most just because I enjoy them. That's just not my personality type. So I knew that for me, I had to be being paid to do it, even though I love to do it, in order to guarantee that it was going to happen. So that's what I chose.
And we have there's a running joke in some of the communities like around here, that, you know, most of the time, a lot of the people who end up getting a lot of the orchestra jobs and all that sort of a thing, they tend to be people who are a lot of times like in graduate school, or they were already in orchestra or something like that. So it's actually really, and I want to commend you for this, like a testament to that you making it a part-time job and making it like a priority for yourself, because it is really difficult. That it's so interesting that a lot of times, like sometimes the best musicians don't necessarily get these jobs because they're too busy working in the field to afford them the ability to practice the things to win the audition. So, I mean, did you set up like a schedule for yourself, or like how was that process when you started taking the auditions?
Yeah, well, you bring up some really excellent points, you know, about how being able to set aside that time for practice and preparation for the audition and getting into the audition game, it really is a privilege in many ways, because I was living with my sisters and, you know, I was paying my half of the rent, but if I had decided that I couldn't cover all of the rent and wanted to dedicate more time to practicing, I would have had that safety net under me to protect me or whatever. And a lot of people don't have that. So they're not able to put, you know, so much time in, or as much time as someone who is. But that doesn't mean that those people that have those limitations aren't also able to audition and be successful. It just means that I had many advantages. So speaking back to the schedule of like how I managed, you know, doing the audition prep, I followed this diagram from a book called 10 Weeks to Finals. And yeah, so 10 weeks to finals. I think it is. It might be 11. I can't remember. And it lays out, you know, from this point to the audition date, you should be doing these things. You know, from this point to the audition date, you do these things. And some of the time, I wasn't given enough notice to do the full 10 weeks. But man, the times that, even if I did like what they said to do from 3 weeks out or a month out, or you know, I still found that was the most productive practice time I had in my whole preparation process. So that I followed that rubric, and I also sought out private lessons. I was able to take lessons online with Emily Scala, who's the principal of the Baltimore Symphony. And that was really cool, online. And then I was also, because I live in Washington, able to take piccolo lessons from Zart Dolly Dunbury and Ebby, who plays in the Seattle Symphony, you know, piccoloist in the Seattle Symphony. And again, that was a privilege. I was able to pay for lessons and drive, you know, take a couple days off because I was in charge of my own schedule. I could take a day off to go have a lesson and drive back and all that. So yes, I had lessons. And then I looped in my friends and family to do mock auditions with me. And so we would set it up as best we could with like a screen or whatever. And they would be as mean, or not mean, they would be as direct and to the point without any emotional niceties in between to like, you know, say, hi, how are you? Like those sorts of things. They don't talk to you that way in the audition room. So they just say, okay, play this and such. Thanks. You know, and that's all. It's all really monotone. And it's just directions, orders. So that's what my friends would do for me, because that can be off-putting, especially if your heart's already going a mile a minute. Yeah, so mock auditions.
6 weeks to finals, Sharon Sparrow?
Here, yes, that's the one.
Found it. Everything you mentioned will get thrown in all the descriptions and all that kind of stuff, so people can find what you're talking about.
Yeah, I have them on my bookshelf over there.
So there's something I wanted to mention before we get into the gig that you currently have. But you had a master's degree, you were working professionally, you were taking these auditions and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But isn't it beneath you to be taking lessons from other professionals while you're a professional? Haven't you already learned everything you possibly could? I say sarcastic.
Well, yes, I get you. Yeah. And that, I'm glad you brought that up, because even among some of my professional colleagues, there is a little bit of just a tiny bit of, well, why do you need that? You know, underlying, just a little one. Most professionals understand. But for me, I had tried to do the audition thing by myself already. And I found that I had trouble being accountable to myself to really put in the time. And this is just honesty talk from my personality, you know, like I needed somebody that I knew guaranteed was going to hear me, you know, in a week. And I wanted to like do well for them, you know? So like, in a way, they were just kind of babysitting me and holding me accountable so that I was definitely 100% practicing, because of course, at that time, I had a lot of things demanding on my time that seemed more important. As I said before, I wasn't someone to put the thing that was most important to me personally first on my list, which of course was preparing for auditions. So in order to get that on the list, I needed to have a partner, you know, somebody who was gonna hold me accountable. So that's one thing. The other thing is, you know, I didn't have a job yet. So there was probably things I wasn't doing quite right, you know? And so I sought people out who had really good jobs so that they could maybe let me know some of those things. And that's the weird thing. I mean, with auditions, we have these orchestral excerpts, right? And there's tools of the trade and like things that are expected, performance practices that aren't written on the page in the hard ink. And so if you're not going with somebody who has been enculturated in the way that these excerpts are played, then, you know, you'll be discounted because you haven't done it the same way as what they expect. So that's a big thing too. And then the last thing is that nobody's ever done being, you know, improving as a musician. I mean, there's always more to do. And I mean, my perspectives and my brain has changed on how I approach the instrument over time. And so I'm always looking for new things to incorporate into my new schema, because if I were to try to apply some of the things that I was taught a long time ago, they don't work in my current setup anymore because I've developed and changed and my habits have changed. So it's, I need new tricks to work with what I'm currently doing now, because our musicianship develops and is so fluid because we're human beings, and you know, your body changes.
It's really cool that you were able to identify, okay, like I like to stay to be able to identify with yourself that, okay, something's not working. let me and not just be like, you know, there's that old Simpsons joke of like, could I be out of touch with the kids? No, they're wrong. You know, and it's so easy to like, as a musician, to be like, well, they just don't like my sound, or they don't like my vibrato, or they don't like, it's so easy to do that. And it's really hard for a musician to like, kind of like swallow the pride, you know, in air quotes, and just to ask somebody else, and another set of ears is never a bad thing. You know, no matter where we get to. So something that I'm really interested in, especially with the ensemble that you're specifically in, genuinely, I am interested in. So sorry, listeners, if you don't care. So you're in, I guess, what I would call like a regional Navy band. Is that the best way to put it, or how is it described?
Sure. We have our premier ensemble in DC, which is the Navy Band. The Navy Band. That's how we refer to it. And then we are the fleet bands. And regional is almost accurate, except that in order to audition nowadays, you know, for any of the 12 fleet bands, it's one audition and then they put you where they need you. So we're competing in the whole nation, you know, for one spot.
So you just happen to get a band that's in your home general area. Huh. That's interesting.
Yeah, it was a total coincidence. I mean, we have 12 stations: Hawaii, Florida, California, Washington, Rhode Island, Virginia, Japan, and did I say Italy? And so I think I don't know. I can't always count to 12.
I was really curious if you were going to be able to just boom, 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 because like that's some in-depth knowledge right there.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
Maybe not.
and I'm just interested. So I I auditioned, like I did the Marine Corps thing for a little bit, and like the MEOP program and how that works out. But I also know Air Force has like its regional bands, and
they're different. Yeah,
and they
audition per band.
But so you auditioned for like a music recruiter, and they gave you your MOS and they put you where you are now. Is the TLDR?
Yeah, I also took a Marine audition, so I know what you're talking about. For the Marine audition, you get placed. A recruiter comes and you audition for that. The musician recruiter or whatever. For the Navy, they have their audition at one place, much like an orchestral audition. They have it in Tennessee. And then everybody comes and they post it, and it's a normal audition process with 3 rounds and all that kind of stuff. So then you're just competing against whoever shows up that day for that audition, and that's outside of your control, so not worth fretting over. But So once we win the audition, then we start going into the medical processing for if you're physically fit to join the Navy, and that depending on how much medical history you have, that just increases the processing time. So whenever I talk with a lot of people who are, like looking at my job and being, seems like a pretty sweet gig. And I'm like, yeah, it is. And they're like, well, I could never get in. I have this XYZ medical condition. And that's not really accurate. There are some very few things that are entirely disqualifying, but mostly all that means is that the medical processing for you is going to take more time because you have waivers and things to go through.
Yeah, it just means more paperwork a lot of the time for your recruit.
Yeah, right.
It's
right.
really
that's
what it ends up being.
Yeah, that's what it means. So I encourage the listeners, please don't discount yourself upon a medical concern, about getting into the Navy, because you really can.
Everybody has this kind of like, I don't know if you've seen the Captain America First Avenger, like in that first movie where he's going through and they're like, no, you're too short. No, you have this. No, you have that. And they all think that the military is looking for reasons to get you out of there. It did seem like when I was going through like MEPS and all that sort of a thing that they want you, if you're a qualified person, they want you there. Like they want specialists.
They have spaces to fill, and it's for a lot of people, it's a hard sell, because of the structured lifestyle, because of having to move all the time, because of having to maintain physical standards and be in shape all the time. Like those are, I feel foolish even using the word hardship, but those are, kind of downsides. It's just
the things you have to keep in mind for the job. Yeah.
Potential cons, depending on who you are.
And now I know when I was going through it, there was a lot of hesitation from people because you feel like, your MOS, which is, in military speak, it's your gig, it's your job. For the most part. And a lot of people get really nervous because there's, you see a lot of people who are in like National Guard bands and things like that, who like, there's still an enlistment soldier who just happens to play trumpet from time to time or something like that. But it seems like with your job is more specifically flute with your ensemble, and then maybe some extra duties within the ensemble. Is that how it's working now?
Yes. Speaking to that, I would not make any assumptions, because every military branch has a different contract. And so what I've heard about the other branches, the Army, the Marines, and the Air Force, everybody has their own contract. So there's little fine print that you have to sift through really actively to really know what you're getting into. So I can only speak to what's true for the Navy, and the Navy musician contract at this time, because they change it, but at this time, our entire responsibility is to play the flute, or for me, is to play the flute and follow whatever orders I'm given by my commanding officer, and to help run the band, with my collateral duties. I'm in charge of, or not in charge, but I help with the keeping the library maintained, of our music, our sheet music. And I'm also, we have these vouchers and monies that come through to cover our travel expenses when we do gigs on the road, which of course right now is not really a thing, but when it was, we were doing that. I would help process those requests. Yeah. And then the rest of it was rehearsals.
And because I know you're doing a good job. But so you don't know this about this, but I started a brass band here in Tampa, and
Yay!
so it's a nonprofit organization and
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff. A good librarian is so important.
Yeah.
It is so important. It looks like we might be getting a grant for a library, like to fill it up, because right now we're kind of borrowing and stealing from every other brass band.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my goodness, a good librarian is so important.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and it sounds like it's one of those like unsung hero jobs of every organization.
Right.
So you had to, did you have to go through recruit training and all that stuff as well?
I did. Yes. Okay. Yes. Actually, I graduated a year ago as of this weekend. So,
oh, well, hey.
Yeah, I left boot camp. Yeah. I got to walk in any direction I wanted that day.
And is it, I know through Marine Corps it was enlistment. Is that the same for the Navy as well?
Yes, we're also enlisted active duty. Yeah.
And then was there any sort of rank progression via your degrees that you had already maintained?
Yeah, I was able to skip, I think, one level. If you get into the premier band, you're automatically bumped like 3 or I don't know. I don't count very well, but I think it's like you get enlisted at E6, and I was enlisted at E3, and now I'm E4. I got a meritorious promotion because I did really well on my final exam score in my ACE school. After I graduated boot camp, we had a 3 to 6 month period at the music school, the Navy Music School in Virginia. So after I graduated boot camp, I went and trained in Virginia.
So you graduate undergrad in Washington. Yeah. You go to Virginia. You graduate Virginia. You go to Washington. Where was your boot camp?
Chicago.
Okay, so you hit Midwest.
Yeah,
and then
I did the middle.
Back in Virginia.
Yeah, I know. It's really funny.
And then you go back to Washington. You just
I'm
one to talk though. I'm one to talk. I've literally spent half my life in Florida and half my life in Virginia, and there's been no other state.
Yeah.
So
it's so funny. I mean, when I found out I was coming to Washington, I'm like, wait, really? Because I had this big goodbye party, and I'm like, see you guys. I don't know when I'll see you again. I'm in Japan.
How far away are you based from where you were?
It's a 5 or 6 hour drive.
Okay, so you're still somewhat significant.
Yeah, I'm still
on this coast. You're like 2 states away.
Yeah,
so you're still somewhat significant.
Yeah.
Well, before we wrap up too much, I like to do a little bit of like we'll call it like a lightning round, just a couple of quick hit questions for you, for the people who might be interested in doing the things that you have done.
Yes. I'll try to keep it short.
And these are more general my interest questions. So, you have both your degrees in performance. You have a master's degree in performance, which is quite significant. Does everybody who's in these ensembles, are they all as educated as you in terms of like, going through the university system? Because a lot of people would see that as a requirement to do these sorts of things.
No, that is not a requirement. You do not need a musical degree of any kind to get into a military ensemble. It all has to do with the audition. If you can beat out whoever shows up that day, then you can have the audition.
And so what does your on-off schedule look like? Like, are you working 7 days a week, 5 days a week? Like, how's that kind of structured?
Yeah, we do a 5-week work day, and it kind of, we get, our hours vary from station to station. At my station, our working hours are from 7 to 4, I think. But depending on what responsibilities we have going on. We can, it's a little flexible about how we can manage our time. And yeah. So it's a normal business hours, like 8 hour
Monday
day.
through Friday type thing.
Yeah. For
at least if you're not on tour or something.
Yeah, right. And that's what's nice. If we have a gig that's over the weekend, then they will give us a day off during the week. So we never work more than 5 days a week.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Now, I had something else. So what are some things for people who might be interested in joining one of these types of ensembles? What are some of the things that you enjoy most about the work?
Well, there's so many things. I'm like, my brain's going, like going through all the things that I love about my job.
We can rule out I'm sure you enjoy playing the flute. Like we can rule stuff like that out. But anything else you might happen to have?
Well, it's really something. Of course, I mean, this job wouldn't be so amazing if I weren't working with such excellent colleagues. We're all really tight, and that's something that's beautiful about the military. It's because everybody's gone through this horrendously traumatic experience of going through boot camp. We all have that in common, and so when you meet somebody who's in the military, if the conversation lags at any time, you can always just exchange stories about boot camp, and then suddenly it's like you're brothers and you were there together. So that's amazing. It's the feeling of community is incredible. And I mean, the most amazing thing that I'm just thanking my lucky stars every single day is that I get to make music and have the paycheck and the benefits of a normal job. That's the amazing thing. I can put my head on my pillow and know that I have health insurance, which is not the case unless you're in like the top 5 orchestras. And I don't even know what their health insurance packages are like, so this is really, to my knowledge, the only full-time music job that has that kind of security. So that's the best thing for me. So
what are some things that if people are interested in it, but they would not be able to deal with it? What are some convexes to that? If you don't like this, then maybe this isn't for you, type of a thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, the military can be frustrating because of the need for all the orders to go down the chain of command. And there are many reasons why that needs to be the case. So it's just kind of something everybody has to deal with. So I think a lot of the time, in a small business, if you see that some things could be done more efficiently, you can kind of go to somebody and say, hey, why don't we do that? And then if you get enough people, to your bossiest boss to say, yeah, that's a good idea, then you can start doing it. But our bossiest boss is way, it's like 30 people removed from your idea. So you can make those kinds of changes, but the time that it takes to make those changes is long and arduous process, for a reason, because it's really important that we be doing things appropriately. But yeah, so if you're looking for something where you can really see your personal impact on your workplace right away, then the military would be extremely frustrating because it you don't see that until you've been in years and years and years and years. And then around the same lines, if you're a person who does not like being told what to do with no explanation, then and just taking it, whether you like it or not, then you'd be mad all the time. So yeah. Probably not good for your health.
Yeah. So last thing, what advice do you personally have for younger people who, and it doesn't necessarily just have to be the military stuff, it could be the freelance thing, the church stuff that you were doing, any of that kind of thing, starting a nonprofit flute choir, whatever. What advice do you have for these people who are just kind of dipping their toes in their music careers and looking for some motivation?
Okay, so for people who are coming out of college and those
Or even
people, what can I tell them?
going into college even.
Yeah. Well, I guess I would say really be honest with yourself about exactly what you want out of your life. And think, in my dream universe, go ahead and build your dream universe, because anything can be done with time and attention and your willpower, and when we're I think when we're so young, there's a lot of pressure to be like, figure out something you can do right now or whatever. And so they look at what their experiences are and what they've been successful with in the past already. And that's really kind of a little window into your entire life. So you should think about, what would make me happiest, like absolutely, regardless of what I've already experienced. And then just go for that 100%, because anything's possible with attention and time.
Great. Well, hey, thank you so much for coming on and having this conversation with me.
Yeah.
I really, really appreciate it. I even have gone through the military recruiting process and I've learned stuff today. So
Yeah.
I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
So I like to put you guys on the spot. Would you like to sign us off?
Sure. Thank you so much for joining us at the Young Musicians Guide. This is Clara Mannino and Aaron Campbell wishing you a wonderful day.